Please welcome Eric Letsinger, Kishia L. Powell, and Stacy Funderburke to take a look at Atlanta's first environmental impact bond.
Hi everyone. Good afternoon. My name's Stacy Funderburke. I work for the Conservation Fund. I'm really excited to be here moderating this panel to talk about a really innovative financing model to address stormwater flooding and some green infrastructure solutions in the city of Atlanta. We do a lot of work across the country on land and water conservation, and we also have a long-standing relationship with the city working on parks and trails, and particularly with the Department of Watershed Management working on green infrastructure and scaling up those solutions across the city. And this is a really exciting example of innovation, and it really took leadership and collaboration to make that happen, in particular leadership by the City of Atlanta Department of Watershed Management, and collaboration with groups like Quantified Ventures and Neighborly to create a new funding source that would not only address stormwater flooding, water quality issues, but also provide additional impacts to the neighborhoods that are facing these. So excited to be here with Commissioner Powell and Eric Letsinger, CEO of Quantified Ventures, and we're gonna have a conversation. I have a few questions for them, and looking forward to the conversation. So I think I'll start with Commissioner Powell. I'm curious, can you tell us a little bit more about how the environmental impact bond came about in the first place? It's a really unique story.
Sure. So the city of Atlanta was selected as one of the 100 resilient cities in the Rockefeller Foundation's 100 RC network. And the former chief resilience officer, Stephanie Stuckey, came to me and said, there's this really great opportunity to apply for this innovative funding approach through 100 RC, and I think you guys should apply. And little did I know that she had already halfway had the application done, if you know Stephanie. And so our team worked with the city's Office of Resilience at the time to put in an application, and we were actually selected as the first city to be able to publicly offer this financing tool, which has been tremendous for us because in the Proctor Creek Watershed, which is where we selected projects to fund, and we're funding about 6 projects for $14 million. We had identified in our watershed improvement plan over 100 project opportunities needed in the watershed to improve water quality and reduce flooding. It's the only watershed wholly within the city of Atlanta, and it's very special. It's part of the Urban Waters program, so we have a partnership with EPA and Army Corps of Engineers and other stakeholders. So we were happy to be able to fund projects because we don't have a sustainable funding source to fund those types of projects. So that's how it came about. How we won, I think, was bringing some of our community partners to the table to talk about the benefits of the projects and the need for the projects. Obviously, Conservation Fund helped with that. WAWA, the West Side Watershed Alliance, West Atlanta Watershed Alliance assisted, and others. So I think that's why we were able to win, because the team that was evaluating our proposals were able to see that we really had projects that were viable to fund, and there was a community around this effort to make sure that it would move forward and be successful.
That's great, thank you. And yeah, I'll echo that it was really impressive how Department of Watershed Management really reached out and solicited input from the community and really built a suite of projects that had been a priority for communities in the Proctor Creek watershed for a long time. Eric, I think a lot of people, we hear a lot about impact investing these days and different vehicles for that. So can you talk a little bit about the mechanisms for the environmental impact bond? How will it work? a little bit more about the partners that came to the table, including Quantified Ventures and Neighborly, and the roles that you played in the issuance of the bond?
Sure. I think the general spirit behind the environmental impact bond model, which Quantified Ventures pioneered with the DC Water and Sewer Authority, that's where we did the very first one of these, is that our public sector leaders are being asked to tackle massive mountains. And in a time of dwindling funding, and they're looking for nickels and dimes in the sofa, and they've got a lot of capital projects they'd like to be moving forward. And the tools that they have to use are pretty limited. In the municipal bond being one of them, which is a phenomenal tool, right? It's the gun that won the West. We built a lot of this country on the municipal bond. But one of the things the municipal bond doesn't do is it borrows the money and then they got to pay it back regardless of whether the thing they built actually worked or not, right? And so the environmental impact bond sort of piggybacks off of the basic premise of the municipal bond, which is a very efficient way to gather capital. But the return on investment from the entity that buys that bond is agreeing to be paid back an interest rate that is 100% dependent on how well that project, the green infrastructure projects, actually perform, right? So they got skin in the game. That's the basic tenet behind these environmental impact bonds. Quantified Ventures, we work with municipalities to structure these, and it requires incredible leadership, which is why this Atlanta environmental impact bond actually happened, and leadership and commitment, because the realities are the journey to structure one of these is 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And Commissioner Powell's team had that mindset and that discipline and that rigor and creativity to hang in the ball game through that process to do something that nobody else has done. There was a lot of creativity involved. We broke a lot of planes with this particular transaction, and the city of Atlanta, with Commissioner Powell's leadership, should be incredibly proud of what they pulled off.
Thank you. It does take incredible discipline because, thank you, because what we had to do was get in the mindset of monetizing the benefits, not just identifying the outcomes that we wanted to happen from an environmental standpoint, but we were very specific in not only wanting to see a certain volume of stormwater capture, but we want to see out of this process the ability for people that are in the neighborhoods where these projects will be implemented to be able to work on these projects. And so not only did it take us identifying specific outcomes for the projects, social benefits, economic benefits, monetizing those outcomes, how much will we get for job creation, how much will we save from flooding mitigation and all of those things, but then working with procurement to say, we've got to look at this differently and we need you to help us put a different approach in place so that we can procure these projects in a way that allows folks from these zip codes to work on these projects. And that is a feat.
Amen.
Yeah, that's a huge commitment, and we've been working in Proctor Creek Watershed for almost a decade, and ensuring that there are economic outcomes in these communities from projects like this is a really big feat, and it's really impressive, the commitment to that. Commissioner Powell, can you alluded to some of the other social and economic outcomes that we'll be monitoring as part of the environmental impact bond. Can you speak to the projects themselves a little more about what types of projects are in the mix across those 6 projects that are being funded at this level?
Yeah, so we're doing green streets with stormwater planters and such. We're also doing a constructed wetlands project, which we're really excited about. Because that will help us repurpose an area that we touched previously when we did sewer separation. And so I think that will be probably a hallmark project of the EIB suite of projects. We're doing some stream restoration, which I'm really excited about because that helps to restore the Proctor Creek stream itself. And we're also doing other green infrastructure practices throughout the Proctor Creek watershed where those projects are sited. We're eliminating an issue which was coined mosquito hole. So that's helping to provide some public health benefit for the projects. It's providing an opportunity for access to green space. It gives us an opportunity to partner with other entities that can build around us. And we want to make sure, and Stacy, that we're using the EIB projects as part of a pilot to pilot our approach for water sector equity in developing our equity roadmap with U.S. Water Alliance. And so we've been talking about how do we equitably invest in infrastructure solutions, not necessarily providing the same solution, but providing opportunities for the community to have say in what happens in those projects so that those communities feel like they're getting what they need to thrive on equal footing economically and otherwise. So I think all of those things are the benefits that we want to see out of these projects and the projects themselves.
That's great. Yeah, I think these projects are allowing Watershed and many other partners at the table to set new precedent for community engagement and the outcomes of the projects themselves. It's really exciting. Eric, when you think about, of course, DC Water had a similar issuance before. I think it was private versus public, but are there any lessons learned from that now that it's a few years down the road? And then I'm also curious how you think of this issuance as breaking new ground and setting new precedent beyond the DC water bond, and in particular, how is it setting up a blueprint and a model for how other water utilities and cities around the country can do this as well?
Yeah, there was a lot of new ground on this particular one. So number one, the way when we structured the Washington D.C. Environmental Impact Bond, it took us longer, right? Because frankly, none of us knew how to do one of these, and we were learning. So we had some learnings to bring to the Atlanta transaction, which counted for something in the how long it took. But the big chunk of time, and by the way, time is transaction cost to the city, so it's a real factor. What we did with this environmental impact bond, I would say the top shelf innovation was it was a publicly issued environmental impact bond. What does that mean? And by the way, DC Water was a privately issued municipal bond. I'll try not to nerd out too much on the bond language, but what does that mean and do it translate into? When you privately place a bond, especially one that was as weird as the DC Water environmental impact bond, it means you have to sit in a conference room for 4 months with your investor and eat bad sandwiches and negotiate the terms of something, right? That's 4 months. And with a publicly issued environmental impact bond, which is what Atlanta did, we never met the investor, right? There's a way to sell bonds. There's $4 trillion of bonds out there. There's a very efficient public market way to sell bonds. The Atlanta environmental impact bond was sold through that process, which is about as efficient as you can get. And that may not sound dramatic, but as those of us who are championing a new financial model that we hope to someday be normal, right now it's just weird. As we progress towards normal, that is a major chunk of what could make a new financial asset class out of this outcome-based financing model that we're both championing.
Yeah, and
I think the part of the angst in the beginning for me especially is when you are dealing with ratepayer funds, it's difficult to be able to say, we're going to use this new financing tool, oh yeah, and we may have to pay the investors for if the projects perform well. But the beauty of being able to monetize the outcomes was being able to show the offset of that performance payment. And so that took a lot of time. We spent quite a long time making sure that we set the threshold at the right point, to be able to say this is the point at which we will pay a performance payment, and have a comfort level that what we were setting and what we say our projects will achieve will actually achieve. So that's the other part of this is, and the skin in the game that we have, we've got to make sure that these projects work and do what we say they're going to do. They can't just perform and solve issues. They've got to perform at a very high level for us to achieve what the outcomes that we've stated and that we've built this bond around.
Right. Yeah, and that I have a follow-up to that, which is how, and Eric, this may be partly a question for you, is when you're thinking about projects like this, and I know the projects in this environmental impact bond, and some of them are projects that have been long sought after in the Proctor Creek watershed, and because of the impact they have for stormwater flooding and the water quality benefits for their surrounding neighborhoods. How do you think about projects, especially a couple of them of this magnitude, and stream restorations and floodplain restorations in both setting your goals for the metrics and timelines for projects that obviously have a lot of built-in uncertainty? So just how do you approach that when you're using a new funding mechanism like this?
Well, listen, I've stopped guessing where this environmental impact bond model is going to go. We started in this business in the stormwater space, right? And we have, here in the next month, you'll see Baltimore's environmental impact bond closing, Hampton, Virginia, Camden, New Jersey. There's a lot of folks out there, a lot of cities who have taken your lead. It's interesting, we now are structuring environmental impact bonds in the forestry realm to address wildfires and building outdoor recreational facilities on national forest land. We have a very large and growing agriculture practice that is using this model to pay farmers to build the agricultural best management practices on their farms to reduce the phosphorus and nitrate runoff from getting in the waterways and then ending up in downstream municipalities who are more heavily regulated to process that phosphorus and nitrate runoff, and are being forced to make big capital investments that they'd rather not be making to process that. And we just got a call last week from the Yellowstone National Park to see if we could use the environmental impact bond model to address some of the bison challenges that they're having. All to say, I'm going to stop guessing where this can go, but the basic premise of allowing public sector leaders who are stewards of public funds and have to choose oftentimes safer business as usual solutions over innovation, by giving them a tool to make it a rational choice for them to choose innovation, by bringing in these impact investors who want to see those type of innovations on the field. Let them shoulder some of the financial burden of that risk, meaning if it doesn't work out well, and sometimes innovation doesn't work out well, right? And which is why it's a difficult choice to make in the public sector. It's your money, right? And so.
Yeah, that's good. Well, at least bison challenges, that's one problem we don't have here so far. Eric, Commissioner, so when you think about, I think Eric alluded to this earlier, that there are a mountain of challenges that you have to face across the city in multiple watersheds to deal with stormwater flooding, with impacts of climate change and uncertainty. It seems like we're having a lot stronger storms, flashier storms than we used to, increasingly taxing infrastructure that was already outdated in many places. And so I guess just when you think about the Department of Watershed Management's approach to smart utility, because I know a lot of that is focused on more resiliency for water issues in the city. How does this fit in your mind? Obviously, it's part of a much larger plan, and how do you think about it in terms of prioritization with all the issues that you're trying to solve for in the city in an increasingly changing climate?
Yeah, it's a lot there, but one of our strategic priorities in our new strategic plan is smart utility. And so we've developed a smart utility approach called H2O and Innovation. We're week after next, we'll be at WEFTech, and it'll be our first preview of our smart environment and our kind of digital transformation. Part of that platform and that approach has been developing a dashboard where we've tied in all of our operating parameters, information that gives us more control and insight into what's going on in the infrastructure that we manage, the systems that we manage. So, for instance, we've just deployed hydrant sensors throughout our distribution network, and that will be tied into our dashboard. That gives us visibility into what's happening in the system to be able to see where leaks are and where breaks may occur so that we can proactively address them. And something like this, we have the opportunity, and I'm so excited about this, but I just met with a group of STEM students at one of the high schools here in Atlanta that have developed a sensor with existing technology, and we will be working with them to pilot that technology for another location where we've been having flooding. We'd like to use that to help monitor what's going on these project sites and bring that data back. Most folks don't know that we already have cameras and flow monitors and stream gauges out in the system along Peachtree Creek and some other places where we're getting real-time data that comes back, and it helps us prevent spills. It helps us respond or know where flooding will occur so that we can be responsive. So this ties into the bigger picture of, one, investing in infrastructure solutions, but then being able to monitor and maintain them. And that, kind of directly ties into our smart utility approach. And everything that we're doing now, we're thinking about, we're looking at things through an equity lens. We're thinking about how do we, what is the people, the process, and the policy behind it, and how do we make smarter business decisions? For us, using this financial tool was a smart business decision to get work done and ultimately be able to have more control and improve the quality of life for folks in these communities through these implementation of these projects.
That's great. Thank you. Eric, if you were having a conversation with other water utilities in other cities who are considering this, what is it about this particular funding mechanism when you're pitching it to them, and why they should choose this over some of the more traditional funding mechanisms for water infrastructure in the city? What should they be thinking about, and I, in a way that benefits their communities as well? Why is this compelling?
It's a good question. So, listen, at Quantified Ventures, we're a pretty nerdy bunch. And we'd like to think that 100% of the value in the environmental impact bond financing mechanism is buried in tab number 19 of our very fancy financial spreadsheet models. But at the top of the list, I've seen from the cities who have been moving forward with environmental impact bonds, is I've seen it create a different narrative with their ratepayers and with their citizens and with at community meetings, meaning citizens are demanding a lot from our public sector leaders, right? And they want innovation, right? They want new, and they want different, and they want less of business as usual, and they want more of the new. They know what they want. And by using this mechanism, I think it creates a conversation with citizens that's saying, listen, I hear you, and we are doing that. We are choosing green infrastructure instead of the gray infrastructure solution that we could have done. And not only am I choosing that, we're paying for it in a smart way that doesn't put the full risk and burden of that innovation on you, the ratepayer, you, the citizen, you, the person who pays my salary, to make those choices. I'm finding, or I think of the cities who are, of this growing cadre of cities who are moving forward with these environmental impact bonds, I think it's that narrative with the ratepayers and with the citizens that it's top of the list.
Yeah, that's great. And I think along those lines, curious, Commissioner Powell, one of the things I know about working in Proctor Creek, that watershed, is that it's a place where many of the neighborhoods there have been disproportionately impacted by environmental issues, stormwater flooding, siting of industrial facilities, and things you see in many cities across the country. So I know you alluded to this earlier, but in your thinking about the siting of those projects all within the Proctor Creek watershed, how did that factor into the decision both to pursue the bond and in choosing the individual projects as well?
Very much so, because, when I think about climate change and just the thought of that, I think you can look at data, specific data. We pull data on, where flooding is happening throughout the city, and you can see that it is in the most vulnerable neighborhoods throughout the city. And I think that's the case for many cities. And so our approach, again, to equity in infrastructure investment is making sure that we're touching those parts of the city that need the investment, and that we're not just implementing the same solutions, but really thinking about the solutions that need to be implemented to help those communities thrive. And there's been a lot of discussion recently. There was a recent presidential discussion on CNN about climate change and the crisis that it is. And it is for many folks that, when you're having to, when you have property that's flooded, or you're having to get to work and roadways are flooded, those are issues that we can help mitigate in a very smart way. And then just thinking about the narrative that I've heard since I've been in Atlanta. I'm not from the city, but I know that the communities in the Proctor Creek watershed, Vine City, English Avenue, those communities have been very thoughtful about what they wanted to see happen. They have developed plans and really taken some time to put those plans in writing. And so it feels great to be able to partner with them to see those projects that they have identified as needing to happen, to have those projects happen. And then again, the Proctor Creek watershed is the only watershed wholly within the city of Atlanta, and the headwaters starts in where our office is, here. And so it just made sense from a lot of different perspectives to really focus on the Proctor Creek watershed and making sure that those project opportunities move forward. They've been waiting for a long time.
That's great. Well, we are near the end of our time, and I just want to say, as a citizen of Atlanta and someone who's is partnering on these projects and in the Proctor Creek watershed, thank you for your leadership and your collaboration. This is something you don't see happen every day in cities, and it's a really exciting thing for the city of Atlanta. So would you please join me in thanking Commissioner Powell and Eric Letsinger?
Thank you.